Thank you.
What is Ruins? A band? A duo? A man? A machine pretending to be a man? It is a stone freak. That is no insult. The man behind one of Japan's most confrontational bands has referred to himself as such. Ruins is a stone freak, or the project of a stone freak. Ruins is drummer Tatsuya Yoshida. Ruins essentially is Tatsuya Yoshida. It has been him alone several times, but Ruins is also more than Yoshida. Ruins was intended as a power trio until the guitarist did not show up for the first rehearsal, so it became a duo. It remained a duo with Yoshida alternating partners until he went it alone. Guitar has been tried in Ruins before, but Yoshida has never liked the sound in relation to Ruins, so there's only two instruments. Yoshida is fascinating, prolific, and his pace is too exhausting for most. Tatsuya Yoshida is a drummer of the heart, usually backed up by a bassist, mostly 5 strings, but he is willing to do anything for rock. Literally rocks. He loves rock music, and he also loves rocks. Before the current internet infoscape, Ruins was one of those peripheral urban legends about Japanese music. It was maybe real, maybe fake. Old fans who discovered Ruins all have stories about walking into an underground record store and hearing that stone noise. Even once Stonehenge was published in the United States in 1990, Ruins' first official release in the English market, Ruins remained an urban legend outside hardcore adjacent circles. It did not help that Yoshida himself rose up out of the Tokyo underground, and Ruins was definitely a product of Tokyo's underground music scene. Ruins was that absolutely psychotic band from Japan with the crazy drummer and fiery strings. Bootlegs of Ruins' first LPs, mostly low-fidelity early releases, seemed to prove Ruins was a genre-defined alien experiment in what could only be called Zeuhl. Ruins' sound is unique. It's really, really, really unique. It is sui generis levels of unique. It takes an irregular drum-based sound and crosses that with screaming, alternating time signatures, and not even sticking to one genre during each song. Throw in a few more instruments or a few less instruments occasionally. Each album is a whiplash of unique blends. One finds it uniquely fascinating or uniquely repelling, maybe both at the same time. Ruins, either as a band or duo, or even a lone wanderer, is monolithic. Ruins has admirers for its concussive and twisting sound, but it is not an economic powerhouse. Yoshida's musical philosophy has been described as being on the verge of noise terrorism by one publication. He's the type of artist who will probably work himself to death for his creative vision, a modern William Morris. When one talks about Ruins, one talks about the stone-hard mind of Tatsuya Yoshida. He is a stone-free freak with a Rolling Stone spirit, and gruesome on the drums. Ruins' main influence and closest comparison is the French group Magma, led by drummer Christian Vanda. Magma is famous for being the group that bent jazz so far, it began to sound like metal, or operetics. Zeuhl. All Magma's music is performed in an alien, emotion-based language called Kobayan, conjured by Vanda. Vanda and the story of Kobaya, performed by Magma, not chronologically, is its own epic, see here, but in the 1980s, Magma got very popular in Japan. This had results. Interesting results. Magma became a musical ideal and sort of godfather to the purposefully alienating bands that populated the dense Tokyo underground in the 1980s. Magma and Vanda are Yoshida's admitted main influences, alongside prog-rock acts like Genesis, This Heat, Gentle Giant, etc. Magma bent jazz until it became metal, so Ruins bent prog-rock until it became something like hardcore or noise. There's a Tao between them. Ruins is usually considered a solo band for simplicity, but it gets complicated the deeper one goes. If most incarnations of French Zeuhl are derived from magma, then most incarnations of Japanese Zeuhl are derived from ruins. That is not a joke either. Yoshida is/was in every notable Zeuhl band in Japan. Zeuhl most often uses fictional languages to perform vocals/lyrics. One could consider it an element of the music's inherently dissociative nature. Zeuhl, meaning celestial music in Vander's fictional Kobayan, is not concerned with the here and now, but with human transformation on another plane. The original Zeuhl is performed in Kobayan, which people say sounds similar to German, Hungarian, or even Japanese. It depends on the listener. It is a language based on emotion and impulse rather than logic and grammar. Kobayan sounds like militaristic chanting when performed by Magma. Yoshida, and whoever he is involved with at that moment, perform ruins in his own speaking in tongues equivalent to Kobayan. This Japanese Kobayan has no official name, but it is more of a Dadaist vocal instrument when used by ruins. Unlike Magma's usage of Kobayan, Yoshida has stated his lyrics, while they are consistent in and to each song, have no explicit meaning. These lyrics exist to allow vocal chanting or scatting. Masculine voices in ruins perform a sort of ululation, while female voices perform a complementary lilting. Ironically, if Magma sounds like false Japanese, then ruins perhaps sounds like nonsense German or French. Once again, there's a Tao between Magma and ruins. They represent opposite sides of the same whole. Vander has acknowledged Yoshida as a talented fellow traveler and called his work remarkable. In return, Ruins often directly credits Magma, and Yoshida often plays De Futura to honor Magma as a band. To stretch a metaphor that barely works even thinner, but has been used by Yoshida, Magma is like Johann Sebastian Bach, and Ruins is like Frédéric Chopin. Yoshida likes Chopin. Magma is concerned with the Baroque noise, bombastic choirs, and an almost Faustian element. The devil is in Magma's music. Ruins, on the other hand, is concerned with textures, scenes, and there is an art element of romantic fading away. Memento Mori or Mono no Aware to Ruins' spirit. There is no Rococo plot outline about the ruins of Earth on Ruins albums. Ruins songs are vicious nocturnes and preludes on drums, and whatever strikes Yoshida's fancy, passing images. Ruins seeks to nearly avoid meaning. Only the album titles Symphonica and Alone nominally relate to the album's contents. Their lyrics are mostly speech-like syllables, their song titles are gibberish or random phrases, and albums are named things like Stonehenge, Graviyaunosch, Refusal Fossil, Varesto, Tzmborgha, etc. Either meaningless dream words or terms that bring to mind Yoshida's affinity for stones and ruins. Everything that remains once meaning is stripped away. Yoshida calls himself a stone freak. The man loves rocks, ruins, and stone statues. Ruins album covers are pictures inspired by Yoshida's travels. Japan, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Australia, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Malta, United States, Mexico, Honduras, Belize, Colombia, Peru, Chile, etc. He even has a website where fans can look at all his personal photographs of geology and history, stones of the world. Beside the aptly named Ruins, one of Yoshida's alternative duos is called Seketsujin, which means cavern temple in Japanese. Tatsuya Yoshida's personal label, and oftentimes username online, is Magai Butsu. Magai Butsu translates from Japanese as the Buddha carved on a rock face. It is a term used to refer to the stone faces of Buddha statues, sleepy, contemplative, enlightened, carved across mountains and rocks across Japan. There are several major Magai Butsu structures throughout Japan, and many more minor ones. Several of Yoshida's personal releases and other projects riff on this stone Buddha term. Some use his face overlaid on that of a stone Buddha in contemplation. One can tell Yoshida has a fascination with monolithic objects, decay, and what remains lingering in spirit. The disposition of ruins is due to Yoshida's origins and prolific nature. The simple fact: this video cannot cover all of Yoshida's projects, bands, collaborations, and one-man shows. Yes, he does one-man shows where he plays multiple instruments at once. Yoshida is insanely prolific, and most people cannot keep up with his ideas alone, much less his drumming. The man cannot be slowed down. Look at this list of projects he has been involved with. It is most likely incomplete too. In fact, I think it's definitely incomplete. There's secondhand reports that, when asked, Yoshida will, half-jokingly say, he is in so many bands each year because he needs to eat somehow. This then has to focus mainly on Ruins with some mention of Yoshida's alternate, often quirky, projects and companions. Yoshida's sonic roots are in the Tokyo underground, the Koenji area associated with punk music, of the 1980s and 1990s, with groups such as YBO2, the name YBO2, or squared, pronounced as Ibo Ibo, one of the typical groups of the Japanese underground that was experimenting with how inaccessible prog-rock could be. It was more theatrical than Ruins would be, as the founder, Kitamura Masashi, had been the editor of a popular music magazine. Ibo Ibo had a more explicit metal and folk influence that would be absent from Yoshida's later work, though would influence the work around him. Yoshida would break from Ibo Ibo in 1990 to fully turn his focus more towards Ruins, and other projects such as playing in a formation of saxophonist John Zorn's Torture Garden in the USA, then later Musica Transonic in Japan in 1995. He moved through alternating indie groups and his own projects as well. These relationships resulted in Yoshida lobbying the idea of a Japanese soul band and having links to most avant garde rock groups in Tokyo: Zenigiva, Kaku Senjo no Ongaku, Koenjihyakkei, Daimonji, Dance Tropes, etc. Ruins as a unit has usually been a drum and bass duo, outside a few exceptions like Symphonica, but that will be noted when it's brought up. Yoshida writes his compositions specifically for drum and bass. Because of this arrangement, as Tatsuya Yoshida is the only consistent member of Ruins, people usually divide the eras of Ruins and Ruins albums by who was the bassist at the time. Hideki Kawamoto was the original from 1985 to 1987, Kazuyoshi Kimoto from 1987 to 1990, Ryuichi Masuda from 1991 to 1997, also again in 2016, then Hisashi Sasaki from 1995 to 2004. Post-2006 though, Yoshida has also worked with alto saxophonist Ono Ryoko as Sax Ruins on 2 albums, Yawiquo and Blimgauze. It is Ruins but with a saxophone. Occasionally, when unaccompanied, Yoshida has also used the name Ruins alone for the band, though it's just him. Those Ruins alone variations often see Yoshida making extensive usage of machines and computers. The claim pushed about was a physical player could no longer satisfy Yoshida's desire for complexity. That is not even getting into Yoshida's collaborations with French guitarist Richard Pinos in his World Heritage band, Stone Freak after all, or his project with Zappa-inspired prog pianist Risa Takeda. Ruins often feels like the auditory equivalent of chewing vitamins. It is a unique experience. Ruins was officially formed in the summer of 1985, while Tatsuya Yoshida was still a member of Ibo Ibo, with Hideki Kawamoto as bassist. Ruins was then one of Yoshida's many projects. It was only later it would grow into a core component, of many components, of Yoshida's musical identity. As said, Yoshida does write out Ruins material as a score. There is little improvisation overall. The intensity and perfectionism of Yoshida's drumming in early live performances attracted quite the underground crowd. The fact Ruins usually performs in intimate venues makes it a visceral experience. One can feel the drums. The noisy, seemingly uncontrolled environment led to comparisons of Ruins with Japanese punk or hardcore groups. But Yoshida has said he was not particularly influenced by punk, nor does he care much for hardcore. Ruins' basis is fundamentally progressive rock, heavily altered, but with influences from hard rock, Indian, and classical music. Okay, so what about the music then? It is often tough to accurately describe Ruins as a whole, because Ruins is not exactly a whole. Ruins' first full album was Ruins 3 in 1988. Re-released in 1993 as an effect, one of the mainstay songs off the album, with Kazuyoshi Kimoto on bass, replacing Kawamoto. Ruins 3 now is actually a remastered compilation of Ruins' earlier singles/EP releases, Ruins 1, 1986, and Ruins 2, 1987. Those early recordings were infamously low quality, even for an underground band like Ruins, which made its name on having a lot of sound back in the 1980s. The preferred versions of these songs are on Ruins 3/Infect, or some of the live albums, but there are uploads of Ruins 1 and Ruins 2 floating around. There are a few send-ups to Ruins influences in these early song titles: Body and Soul, Cambodia, Entropy, Dadaism, and Stonehenge. The song Birth Control 2 may be a reference to the German krautrock band Birth Control, but the song sounds more like a deranged war chant or labor pains. Cambodia and Stonehenge, though, surface again and again throughout Ruins albums as morphine standards for Yoshida to toy with. He likes one song, then brings it back in a different way. Outburn might be skull-crushing to those unprepared for it. It starts out relentless and does not stop. The rest of Ruins will follow in this fashion. The screaming is already at a maximum here. This only increases for the next track, Epigonen, which continues with shrill screaming. Tracks like Sanctuary and Praha In Spring feel orthodox compared to the rest of the album, as in, they are a fusion of prog and classical that a normal human being will probably perceive as music. Probably. Sanctuary sounds like a deranged progressive rock track, a la Yes, played at blistering speeds, but most would recognize it as a typical song. Praha In Spring is an alien classical composition played on drums and bass that uses nonsense vocalizations as a chorus. There too is the heavy, punctual magma influence of boisterous dictation of incoherent syllables. The track Cambodia 2 shows the magma influence was heavy, with bombastic drums and exclamations, but the following track, Human Being, counters by showing the brash prog side of Ruins again. Other tracks like Dadaism expend the endless and abrupt energy of Ruins, with a post-rock-like opening. Praha In Spring is one of the sweeter pills that make the Avant Gardism of Ruins go down easier. Yoshida's drumming is spectacular overall, and, well, good. Kawamoto's bass work often struggles to keep up in places. That may have been the reason why he was only part of Ruins for about 2 years. Anyone looking to get into Ruins will get the full Ruins experience with Ruins 3, but it is ironically one of the least accessible albums because it is 2 Ruins. This one might scare a couple people off. Ruins' next album would be Stonehenge in 1990 and see Kazuyoshi Kimoto on bass duties. It would be the first Ruins album released officially internationally, though a few had trickled over beforehand. So Stonehenge did quite a lot to color the foreign perception of Ruins, both in the United States and other Anglophone countries such as England. English critics at the time deemed them a Japanese Primus. It is a stretched comparison, maybe even a tortured one, but not an uncommon one. There's a grain of truth there. Stonehenge began to showcase Ruins' stock in its energetic, pinpoint performances. These can now be heard on album. The opening track, Big Head, is Kimoto getting a chance to outright display his skills. Iron Lady is one of Stonehenge's more fascinating tracks with a very laid-back groove, followed by Yoshida's practice-perfect erratic drumming. Kibbutz and Fallout's ominous, gravely militaristic vocals, though, show Ruins was still heavily reliant on that magma influence. It's dark and moody. Then there are frankly weird tracks like Hexagon, which is composed of strangulated babbling, burping, and gagging noises. Very avant garde. Others like Whole Bones retain a high-sounding, almost religious register, which shows the underappreciated classical influence in Ruins. Stonehenge, as the name implies, is the main showcase of the album, and is one of those tracks where Ruins borders on metal. The vocals are strained with a very stressful bang-go rhythm that is a favorite pattern of Yoshida's. This is a good example of what the Ruins sound can achieve when focused. A ritualistic entrance in noise, started in Hail, is followed by an ending in bestial catharsis. Thebes, which follows Stonehenge, continues the ominous, almost hateful, cultic vibe, with Kimoto and Yoshida's dueling vocals throughout the track, ending with an ominous section of near silence in the middle. Thebes then concludes with a bass-focused bacchanalia of doom, signaling something is coming. Special note to Bug, or B.U.G, a Ruins classic and fan favorite. Bug is one of Ruins' longer tracks, usually clocking in at around 6 minutes. It swings between focused booms of noise and a splintering cacophony of Yoshida's drum work. This shifts into a distorted section of repeated beats. The central piece of drum and bass work is rather hypnotic for a band that is usually about breaking the scales to reach the atmosphere. Yoshida knows what he wants to do and accomplishes it. Despite Ruins' reputation as a wall of sound, Yoshida is actually rather minimalist in his work, but it is a practice minimalism. Ruins never wastes the listener's time, but it does require the listener's attention if they want to enjoy it. Other tracks to take note of on Stonehenge are new/altered versions of Dadaism and Effect. The early Ruins material often blends together as the fundamentals of the band were being laid out. Burning Stone, 1992, is usually the recommended entry point to Ruins, at least in regards to the United States. Burning Stone errs more towards an aggressive sort of prog rock, rather than the rambunctious noise rock of Ruins' earlier albums. The opening, Zaska Koska, has identifiable instruments before it breaks down into a sequence of purposeful tape distortion. That is not to say there's no screaming on Burning Stone, there's a lot actually. It is simply considered the end of Ruins' early period and start of the project's middle period. This period would be defined by Ryuichi Masuda, who would become Ruins' longest-serving bassist. The bass would become a lot more tangible with Masuda present, though, as a warning, there are version differences between the USA and Japanese releases of Burning Stone. The 1992 US release seems to be an earlier cut of the album, but it varies by country of release. Old material and motifs that resurface on Burning Stone sound much more robust. Goldstone may sound like deranged carnival music, but it is not any stranger than what Ruins established itself on. Onyx shows how much speed Ruins can reach in their performance. It keeps the pace well with a metronome-esque section, a favorite tag and motif of Yoshida. The following Sack and Power Shift sound both groovy and melancholic, as the duo whiplash switch through about 5 genres of sound. That foreshadows Yoshida's enjoyment of melodies. Power Shift sees a rather beefy performance by Yoshida as well. There's also tortured screams at about 20-22 minute mark because Ruins, so that's on the album. Cool vocals though. Other songs like Cool Jam, Negotiation, and Gap are pleasant to the average listener if they can tolerate Ruins' vocals. Yoshida likes his evolving cyclical sequences like a sonic dharma. It shows Ruins is much more than about being just loud, and was a foreshadowing that they can sound very prog rock. This continues with Misonta, which is one of Ruins' more twangy tracks, and shows an influence from pop, classical, and even Indian or folk music. A lot is focused on the strings here, a fun sound Ruins would return to. The eponymous Burning Stone is one of Ruins' more rocking tracks then. It might be hard for the average listeners to get into it with all the heavily distorted sections though. Drum work is put into focus, and Yoshida shows how much he can do in a single song. A lot. He can do a lot. It is a respected album because of exactly that. One of the main criticisms of Ruins' middle period is that after Burning Stone, the duo became too predictable with Masuda on bass. Noise elements lost presence to a more prog-focused approach. Graviyaunosch, 1993, it has to be pronounced with a certain Ruins accent that I can't replicate, has a more intimate sound and production than Ruins' prior albums. It is also where the aggressive noise side of Ruins flipped to the underground prog rock side of Ruins truly, though neither side would ever fully overwhelm the other, hypostatic union. Unfortunately, there's not too much that can be chewed over on this one. The opening of Graviyaunosch is a tour de force of what Ruins can sound like, and may be one of the best microcosms of the band/duo. This version of Sanctuary is more relaxed, and those who dislike Ruins' heavier noise elements may prefer it. Thrived, as always, is a very guttural Ruins track, and has made appearances elsewhere. There's unnerving repetition and remorseless drum work which carry on better in this album. Nacht, despite the exclamations, is actually a slower song with echoey soundscape. It's groovy in the only way Ruins can make a groove. It feels like being disembodied in a very large warehouse. The rest of the album is live performances of previous Ruins songs at the club Junkbox. Often, it feels like the rest of the album exists solely to justify placing Graviyaunosch, the song, at the center of it. Maybe it does. Heider Mas Groningim, 1995, once again I make no promises I'm pronouncing any of this correctly, would see the official start of Ruins' long relationship with John Zorn's Avant Garde Zadig label. Zorn lived near Yoshida's apartment during his time in Japan's independent music scene. Graviyaunosch was like being in a small room. Heider Mas Groningim is like being alone in a desert with Ruins. It is a playful album which signifies Ruins are comfortable with their musical identity at this point, a decade in. It has what I think are the best Ruins song titles, Memories of Zoishite and Ordinary People in Idaho. That's the full spectrum of Ruins titles right there. Songs on it like Speedball are cut and dry, obviously influenced by the title. There's a sci-fi/space music soundscape that is not present in other Ruins' earlier albums, but do not take that to imply there's a high concept to this album. The production, and playing with the effects/pedals, gives this album a psychotic rather than manic nature for Ruins. Here's a platform that all Ruins albums until Yawiquo will build off of as a standard. Ruins' explosiveness is retained to openings, closings, or 30-second interludes on this album. The opening, 0333 or 033, is classical experimentation. Perf 2 shows how experimental the duo was becoming in sound, but maybe not in technique. Heavy fuzz on the bass, xylophone-like lightness, and a Middle Eastern ambience before introducing Ruins' vocals, and ending with a sliding scale of distortion. Memories of Zoishite and others like Stone Eater represent the heaviness with a more prog focus. Ordinary People in Idaho, on the other hand, has what can only be described as a washboard sound off the main strings. It creates an odd but satisfying country soul effect until it breaks down into twangy strings, Primus comparisons again. Then, Dolin Vlast is a tribal drum beat and distortion to produce a war chorus broken by tough bass sections. The song concludes on vocals which alternate between angelic, cartoonish, and slurping. Heidermast Groningim is a safe but refreshing album. It may be impossible for most people outside Japan to pronounce it. Probably most people inside too. Refusal Fossil, 1997, then remastered or released in 2007 from Skingraft Records, is a tough album to give any opinion on because it is a vast menagerie of collected Ruins material, studio and live, from 1995 to 1997. This is the cutting room floor of Ruins experimentation. Some tracks like Stara Planania are new, and others like Infect are reimaginings, or even reimaginings of reimaginings. Oddly, Refusal Fossil is one of Ruins' most accessible albums then, because it works as a good sampler. It may also test the listener's sanity. It features other players too. Kikuchi Nariyoshi plays alto sax on Ramification and Daskriv, Yamamoto Saichi on guitar in Delphansi Kant, and Oguchi Kenichi on keyboards. Their appearances foreshadowing directions Yoshida would touch on in Symphonica and explore more in Sax Ruins. This does not mean these tracks sound any less chaotic. As it is somewhat of a grab bag, Yoshida's main influences, prog-rock, magma, and 20th century classical music in composition, or even Indian ragas, are obvious on the album. This, due to Refusal Fossil's cut-up nature, also marks the first major appearance of Hisashi Sasaki on bass for Ruins. He would go on to be Ruins' main bassist for the next 9 years, 1995 to 2004, and heavily influenced the direction of Ruins' sound for several of the following albums. The hardcore and noise elements are slowly replaced by objectives more in line with progressive rock and experimental music, for whatever experimental means here. Refusal Fossil then signals the end of Ruins' middle period, outside some live and collaboration albums that will not be covered here for simplicity. Again, Ruins' discography is very complex and very vast. Yoshida's fascination with stone shows through in the title, as these are Ruins' fossils. Refusal Fossil, those stoneworks that were rejected. Refusal Fossil is a series of varying experimentation, rather than a cohesive album driving for a main sound. The eponymous opener, Refusal Fossil, is the classic Ruins shotgun blast of sound like slamming against a sonic wall, music as a physical force. The follow-up, Iskiltos Zaim, dips into some metal sequences though with a very deep, sludgy sound. Then, Stara Planina sounds like an Indian pop song produced by aliens based off a decayed signal found 1,000 years from now. It's fun and full of pleasant vocals and riffs. The quirkily titled Eccentric Ditch sounds like elevator music interspersed with sections of drumming rapid enough to be mistaken for machine gun fire. Then, songs like Daskriv are texturally brief throwbacks to early Ruins. Those might be called hardcore. Gravestone is a frankly odd fusion of Japanese pop, Ruin sound, and a militaristic sound which avoids classification, but veers close to something like overproduced garage band. Der Fancy-Kant is a Jekyll and Hyde track that flips between an oppressive rock sound and Ruins, by this point, practiced Zeuhl sound. The end of the song is so rapidly changing as to sound schizophrenic. Yoshida will return to revise it later. Whereas Ruins is often headache-inducing due to their unrelenting nature, Refusal Fossil is unrelenting due to its pure dynamic sound. It may still also give a few people a headache. Its patchwork nature never settles into any niche or groove, for better or worse. It is a menagerie of material from Yoshida that never fit on any other album. Thus, Refusal Fossil is enjoyable, but it is composed of a lot of varied, bony odds and ends, even for Ruins. There's some awkward, some good, some very interesting. Symphonica, in 1998, is Yoshida scaling up several iconic Ruin songs to a full band arrangement, with Emi Eleonola and Kuboto Aki of Bondage Fruit on vocals, Oguchi Kenichi on keyboard, and Sasaki Hisashi on bass. Female vocals and keys do a lot to change Ruin's soundscape into a much moodier combo, rather than a harsher style like it is originally. It is not a typical Ruins album then. It sounds a lot more like a band than Ruins does, if that comparison makes any sense by now. One comment described it as a halfway point between Ruins and Yoshida's orthodox soul band, Koenjihyakkei. A not unwanted comparison, as a spruced-up formation of Ruins is obviously going to sound a lot like Yoshida's other soul bands. Remember, he's in a lot of bands. One can argue there's a slight resemblance to Zappa in certain sections of this version of Infect on this album as well. The songs featured are pulled from Ruins' early albums. Thebes, Big Head, Praha In Spring, Thrive, Infect, plus Graviyaunosch, etc. On this version of Thebes and Infect, there is an interesting operatic quality other Ruins albums lack without the feminine voice or feminine wail. Big Head is also able to retain the classical Ruins twists, turns, and swerves in mood between jaunty and foreboding. The keyboard work all over the album is very nice. There's not much else to say about Symphonica because, as the name implies, it is a symphony. The variety of sound gives the album a digestible quality for those who dislike Ruins' normal style, but this is fundamentally Ruins gussied up. There's no attempt to hide that. Yoshida's ideas can take form as either a band or as a simple duo. Wreszto, in 1998, is okay. It is a perfectly competent Ruins album that leans towards the softer side of the spectrum. This is due to Sasaki still finding his sea legs, stone legs, with Yoshida in the studio. Varido, for example, is Ruins at their most Magma sound-alike. There's militaristic, operatic hymnal vocals combined with rapid, jazz-inspired drum and bass progression. The entire album unfortunately falls victim to being rather safe. Feneko tries towards the louder but lacks the needed edge. Other songs like Degad, Zomvigo, and Savaldix sound like Magma with obvious tinges of metal, Zomvingo, hints of classical, Degad/Wreszto, and Prog-Rock, Zvaldix. Hippelgoth, though, does display an interesting cultic groove, recalling the earlier Thebes, while Baguto and Kosrito recall the lighter grind sections of B.U.G, Bug. There are fun tracks like Koperm, and slower sections to Jeragog, but the entire album sort of slides by. Mokchilo, though, is a salmagundi of how odd Ruins can be, but it is more operatic madness than a song. The issue is Ruins going too light on what gives Ruins the strong definition of soul. Wreszto, at the least, feels rather short because there's nothing that drags the album down, nor really lifts it up. It is pleasing in those regards. If it was any longer, it would come across as rather limp. There's not much new being done on Wreszto, which is a common complaint of Sasaki's tenure with Ruins. Wreszto and Palsztom are the two Ruins doldrum albums that satisfy no one really, but they are not disappointments. These two veer heavily from early Ruins, focus maybe too much on progressive elements, and have a lack of sticking experimentation. There's not really a lot of core ideas that drive these albums. Palsztom, 2000, suffers from the same issues as Wreszto did, though it has interesting pieces that make sections of it much more memorable. The album overall does sound closer to what people expect of Ruins than what Wreszto did. Sasaki here is much more able to match Yoshida's speed on the drums. Śniażmo has some nice bass sections courtesy of Sasaki. The title track, Pelishtom, falls victim to the syndrome started in Vereshto though. It sounds more like a hard rock song rather than a more reckless version of what Ruins should probably sound like at this speed. The second track, Garavisperdo, is more unique with a discordant metal texture that foreshadows the next album, Tzmborgha. Celodomigotso shows an interesting parallel Yoshida and Sasaki are able to generate on the album. The earthy drums on it are matched by the cosmic bass. It is the Tao of the Eternal Ruins duo, even if their identities are not Tatsuya Yoshida or Hisashi Sasaki. Then, Guaramalpish is another Ruins song that is so fast it sounds absurd. Yoshida never slacks on the speed, and this album definitely turns it up. This is best considered with Filosomam, which shows the lighter side of light speed. This continues with songs like Quetzalcoatl, yes, an actual word appears here, which, for Ruins, is a chill groove that Yoshida is able to add bone-breaking drums to. The album also includes early, essentially primary versions of Yawiquo and Blumgauze, that would later be reinterpreted by Sax Ruins. Those versions are fascinating, but the versions included on Pelishtom feel hollow. They're outshined by their later revisions. Yet, the sort of fall and return arrangement can be glanced in both manifestations, early and later. Pelishtom then concludes on 3 medleys: classical music medley, hard rock medley, and progressive rock medley. These medleys of iconic songs appear scattered about Ruins' discography. The idea is not as absurd as it sounds at first, but it is Avant Garde because it is Ruins. This should be expected by now. The medleys are always interesting and always good when they appear. Yoshida pays homage to all his influences with usually 5-second sections in each medley track, 5 seconds dedicated to each iconic song or composition. Yoshida is noteworthy because he can put together a classical music medley, yes, and play it on drums. It sounds good too. Yes, Magma does make an appearance in the progressive rock medley. Pelishtom is the album where the musician element of Ruins begins to show heavily, Tatsuya Yoshida peeking through the curtain. The listener learns to appreciate Ruins, maybe by the way of Stockholm Syndrome, but they begin to appreciate all of Yoshida's small quirks. For example, a fun game to play is to listen to each medley and figure out how many songs you can name. I won't spoil it for you. Tzmborgha 2002 is the album that bookends the original idea of Ruins, is synonymous with the name Ruins, and is arguably the final evolution of Ruins' original sound, dating all the way back to the original LPs and EPs. It paradoxically comes after these somewhat middling albums of Vereshto and Pelishtom that veered away from that sound. Tzmborgha is a favorite for its unbreaking confidence and monolithic sound. Confident and loud, but it knows how to use that loudness for a greater purpose. The arrangement on the album is tactical with all of Ruins' skills put to use. Tzmborgha builds a monument to the sounds the human body can produce with instruments and vocals. The mouth is fully made into an instrument on Tzmborgha. The thumping bass and drums of a Skandraviza is where screaming is matched with high-pitched vocal gesticulations. This continues with Mevugoth, which features vocals like babbling in a dead language. The horror-like vocals and distortion continues until Yoshida segues into some speedy prog rock with tones of hypnotic psychedelic music. Though, as always with Ruins, attempts to contain even one song to a single genre style is impossible. Interesting then, Yoshida inserts Messiaen, a tribute to 20th century French composer Olivier Messiaen, as the 4th track. Messiaen is from where the more playful and mysterious stylistic elements of Ruins originate. Motifs of near silence cut through with loudness like Messiaen's Prélude l'Économe. Tzmborgha may act as a tribute to Messiaen's description of that track, orange with violet veins. Tzmborgha was also released by the label Ipecac Recording. You know, Ipecac, the stuff that makes a person throw up. They don't use it much anymore. Intentional or not, but knowing Yoshida it's likely highly intentional, Tzmborgha has a sense of humor. The strict organization of the album Tzmborgha shines through in all the tracks. Honzenberg begins as a disciplined boom and bust repetition of the nonsense word Honzenberg, one of Ruins' catchier terms, before shifting to a sleek groove section at 135. It is a boisterous building up as it transforms into another element of Ruins, monotonous beats which blossom into futuristic strings played by angels. One of the starkest and funniest genre shifts on any of Ruins' albums, as 2 minutes to 5 minutes does not even sound like anything by Ruins. It is a complete transfiguration. Zeuhl and Ishiguro continue this dual nature which is contained in Tzmborgha. Both are ominous, but Zeuhl focuses on complexity of sound while Ishiguro focuses on pure volume. Zeuhl is a polished gem, and Ishiguro is a massive boulder. The entire album mines that refined and unrefined contrast. The deliberation of Yoshida and Sasaki's playing show with the termination of Ishiguro, which pretends to be a false loop until it breaks apart, like a stone rolling down a slope. While Zeuhl and Ishiguro are heavily hard rock / metal based, Zeuhl returns to a prog rock style and wailing vocals. Sasaki plays his bass up and down the charts on this one, but it shows how Ruins can make simple movements sound complex. Chittam Irangayo is actually another tribute, a Telugu song, alongside Mahavishnu Orchestra medley, this one to Indian violinist V. Lakshminarayana, also to L. Shankar, and Indian music as a subtle influence on Ruins. It's a direct cover, but attuned with the usual Ruins loudness and playing with some dissonance. A fusion of the Indian-style music, even the vocal elements of ragas, and Ruins' attuned prog rock, sometimes called brutal prog rock. It is a change of pace which reveals an interesting segment of Tzmborgha's DNA. The title track, Tzmborgha, continues this Indian folk prog rock genetic splicing. There's elements here harkening all the way back to Stara Planina. Oh, then there's the Black Sabbath medley reversible, which is exactly what it claims to be. Yoshida essentially playing a medley of Black Sabbath songs in reverse. He plays the Black Sabbath songs in reverse, sometimes. It depends on the occasion. Tzmborgha can most definitely lay claim to being one of the most unique albums out there. After Tzmborgha, which was a success as far as Ruins albums go, Sasaki Hisashi departed from the duo in 2004. Ruins would revert to a purely Yoshida-directed project with all that entails. Yoshida then embarked on a bassist wanted tour to find a new partner. He traveled across Japan and the United States, playing with bassists in multiple cities to find a good candidate. None could satisfy him. Yoshida then deemed it time to reinvent Ruins and the project's entire history with alternate formations like Sax Ruins in 2008 and Ruins Alone in 2011. Ruins Alone, then, is simply Tatsuya Yoshida alone. It is considered more or less distinct from his one-man performances, though. Instead of a bassist on it, his companion is a computer, other mechanical electronic synthesizers, or Yoshida playing another instrument simultaneously. Strong vocals are reduced, though not totally absent, in favor of pushing drums to the foreground. This is what happens when Tatsuya Yoshida is unleashed with only machines as his companions. The album's speed is so futuristic as to make the listener feel like, if they stop, they're going to break their neck. Yoshida's stony face on the album cover represents the wall the listener will crash into, always staring down, always impending, always unrelenting. Ruins Alone, on Alone, 2011, is both the most precise and most constructed Ruins ever sounded. That is because it is Ruins alone. Only Yoshida here. It is a mixture of a tribute to Ruins' entire history, a new arrangement of that history, then patched up with fresh studio material. Songs as disparate as Leipzig, Stonehenge, Sanctuary, Palishtom, Baghdad, Shvostis, Cambodia, etc. receive new hyper-Yoshida produced versions. This reimagined version of Stonehenge sounds purely futuristic, like a song composed a millennium from now and sent back to alter the evolution of music. The album openers, Djemvlesap, Leipzig, and Isogriver, though reassert this is built on a foundation of Ruins. The later Boxing Gliaz, returning to a tense Baroque fugue combined with gibbering chanting, with shades of both Thebes and Kiplegoth in it. Loudness and Yoshida's drums used to create a dark and oppressive atmosphere. Then, Naturuno is a bubbly song which is the Ruin style mixed with an open nocturne Chopin influence. This sound, seen sideways influence from Sax Ruins, which we will come to, focuses more on texture and shifts. Once again, an element of classical in Ruins. There's little bombast on that song, which signifies that Ruins Alone is distinct from Ruins, at least in regards to this song. Gleshinek and Opliksamat take Yoshida's established Ruin style and mixed it with electronic music. Then there's a fusion of loudness, electronic, and even brief sections of chiptune on Grubango. Grubango even goes one step further by having pseudo-rap rock vocals. Alone really shines in regards to production and use of computers/electronics or musical instruments on the album. There's a lot of interesting ideas that Yoshida was floating around on it, showing his evolution was not limited to Ruins as a duo. In contrast to the solitude of Ruins alone, Yoshida had also formed Sax Ruins with saxophonist/flutist Ono Ryoko in 2007-2008. Both interested in rhythmic patterns in music, and Ono Ryoko having her own constructed language art lyrics akin to Yoshida's hyperactive gibberish. This duo was more ornate and performed a jazz blues version of Ruins, somewhat descended from 1998's Symphonica. The bass and keyboard replaced with woodwinds here. Fans have described it as Yoshida's image of free jazz, Tusk Festival claims at 200 RPM. The project was a total reimagining of Ruin's sound structure, but retaining the same key motifs and progressions on the drums. Most major Ruins pieces, for lack of a better term, appear in a much altered state on Sax Ruins' 2 albums, Yawiquo and B.U.G. Sax Ruins began as a massive change with Yawiquo in 2008-2009. Tatsuya Yoshida was still on drums, and Ono Ryoko appeared on alto saxophone, but unlike other Ruins incarnations, Yawiquo made sparse use of overall vocals. The saxophone had replaced the mouth on this album, abandonment of lyrics, whatever that means in regards to Ruins, but still essentially an instrument of its own in Yoshida's toolkit, means Yawiquo falls much more towards jazz than the established fusion of prog-rock, soul, and hardcore Ruins is usually identified as. This new sound invigorates the Ruins standards like Heiramastagronijim and Parishtom, but there is an argument to be made Yawiquo is retreading old material for Yoshida. The novelty of the sound is due to Ryoko's talent on the saxophone. Memories of Zorishite makes an appearance as Zorishite, which is similar to the original version, but the bass has been swapped for saxophone. Parishtom's jazz version is, arguably, more interesting than the version from 2000. The same can be said of Serdemundstel from the same album, which receives an update, turning it from an artificial, not negative, hard rock song into a warm, alien jazz-like swing track. The saxophone adds strange dimension to Ruins because Heiramastagroningim here sounds like a smash-up of a 1970s cartoon chase scene and a Louisiana Mardi Gras band. Jazzcore-like. A literal smash-up too, like an aesthetically pleasing car crash. Then, simpler reimagined tracks like Gravestone and Zojimo have that distinct echo of Earth blues. The production here is superb, but fundamentally, Yoshida is still moving at the same pace as he was on Parishtom and Tzmborgha. It cannot be denied that Yawiquo has novelty and flows very nicely. Anyone who dislikes Ruins' typical sound, give a chance to Yawiquo, as it displays an interestingly softer dynamic which is pleasing to the ear. It's more jazz than whatever Ruins can truly be considered. The second, and as of now last, Sax Ruins album, B.U.G. 2013, is much more interesting insofar as it is a standalone project. Almost. Ruins transmogrified with elements of classical jazz and Japanese fusion. How can Sax Ruins produce an intensity through alternate avenues than merely loudness? B.U.G. is unrelenting in its persistence towards this goal. B.U.G., the title track, given new life and expanded on from Parishtom. It is a very, very good version. Ryoko's saxophone gives it a nature which is both methodical and sweeping, while Yoshida's rhythmic running drum gives this longer version a backbone. Leriko Shoru is similar and displays Yoshida's penchant for pseudo-repeating rhythmic sections which continuously evolve into a greater sequence like cells dividing. That pattern can again be heard in the drum and sax violence of Delfonsikant. The song gets fancy, with speed and time signatures as the title echoes the fancy cant. The control of motion melds into tense sax howls until it sounds like passionate sax. Orido, again, most of Sax Ruins is reincarnated Ruins songs, sounds like chasing music. That is the best description. A lot of Sax Ruins sounds like chasing music, honestly. That is not denying the quality of the songs, but Sax Ruins more often sounds like music, rather than the experimental noise clash of classical Ruins. Well, actually, Sax Ruins sounds like a soundtrack. Ruins sounds like sound effects. The saxophone does convey a bright sense of triumphancy that only it can convey at the crescendo of each song. Where the original Ruins was like a machine gun, Sax Ruins is like an expanding bomb. The roots of Ruins have not been ripped out, as the titles of these jazz reprisals imply. Other songs, such as Big Head, appear as throwbacks, and, as a tribute to Ruins' true origins, Big Head here is the most cacophonous version. The saxophone introduces a nice interlude around the 3-minute mark, which adds a mixture of peace and harmony. Though, it has to be admitted, Ryuko's saxophone can sometimes sound squawky, likely on purpose, and Yoshida too can fall into the issue of playing too fast to appreciate the intricacies. It is Ryoko's eye of the storm, whereas Yoshida is almost always all storm and turbulence. That can be heard in the Sax Ruins originals, such as the incredibly named Tzmborgha, with the latter half of the song sounding akin to Stravinsky's funeral song, played on saxophone and drums. There's a fun electricity in the half-and-half nature. The 4 brief improvisations included at the end of the album are excellent too. One could claim it is Yoshida forced to work outside his comfort zone, but Yoshida could be at the bottom of the sea or on the moon and still be comfortable on the drums, as long as he has a drum kit. Improvisation 4 is the most impressive with a sense of a slowly rising power like a sea swell, moody as it ascends the scales. It is again reminiscent of Stravinsky and shows Yoshida's influence from classical music. Anyone who likes rock, jazz, or various soundtracks will enjoy B.U.G, at least on the technical level. B.U.G is simply an excellent album. Yoshida is like that strange uncle who owns a really good stereo. Harmless, probably, but nobody knows half the vinyls he owns or where he gets them from. A YouTube comment from @TheWatch best describes that Yoshida image, which is tangible in all Ruins and Ruins adjacent projects. Cool. I didn't know he could speak. I thought he could just sing in a weird and awesome way and play the drums like the incarnation of some powerful ancient Japanese deity, and play several other instruments on the side. I prefer to think this commenter meant could speak at all, and thought Yoshida was just an incredibly powerful mute, like some savior come out of obscurity. Yoshida does an estimated 150 to 250 shows across the world in a year, probably more depending on travel time, so he does not have much time to talk. What is Yoshida always so busy with beside Ruins? Well, he needs to eat, and he needs to make music, so Tatsuya Yoshida has been associated with more bands than can be enumerated here. The major band is the psychedelic rock group Acid Mother's Temple, Kawabata Makoto's group, which grew out of the same Tokyo scene and association as Ruins. Though Yoshida was not a founding member of Acid Mother's Temple, he was and is very close with the founders. Akin to Ashra Temple, though influenced by bands like Deep Purple, that group has even more subgroups and divisions than one can count. Acid Mother's Temple SWR, Acid Moon Temple, Acid Mother's Gong, Acid Mother's Kaiden, Acid Mothers and the Melting Perisio UFO, a so-called freakout group, and I think the name is a reference to Yellow Magic Orchestra. One common Acid Mother's Temple SWR formation featuring a trio of Kawabata Makoto, Atsushi Suyama, and Tatsuya Yoshida. That trio are 3 major collaborators and 3 major figures of Tokyo's underground music scene, if not the godfathers of said scene. Yoshida's other projects mostly exist by way of both Ruins and Acid Mother's Temple. They're essentially spin-off collaborations. All these groups have a unique sort of musical humor, such as Akaten with Atsushi Suyama under Yoshida's Magai Butsu label. Suyama and Yoshida are so inseparable in the Japanese music business, the joke on the Japanese internet, mostly image boards, is that the two are married because all their projects are essentially joined at the hip. Akaten is described as a convenience store punk band then. Yep. Using the techniques of Ruins, the duo makes music out of things found at a convenience store. Zippers, cups, wine bottles, full wine bottles since wine is usually consumed on stage by the players during live performances, water bottles, and other junk drawer miscellany. The idea is to perform the music as cheaply as possible, with everyday objects and odd acoustics. They have an entire song played on pencil sharpener. Pencil sharpener! The term Akaten essentially means Red Heaven, and is treated as a store or consumer goods brand by Suyama and Yoshida. The convenience store the two supposedly work at in band is called Akaten, for example. All the Akaten album covers, yes, they have made several albums, this isn't a one-off joke, are designed like convenience store sushi boxes, Akaten 1 and 2, snack boxes, Akaten 3, and wine labels, Chateau d'Akaten. The albums were occasionally even sold actually wrapped too, supposedly. Appreciation of food and drink is a main theme. The two act like a Japanese comedy duo on stage, but do play music. Most of the lyrics are just repetitions of brand names or foreign places though, often sung in intentionally odd tones or accents. Akaten even has sequences dedicated to the United States, America, titled things like USA Fast Food, USA Baseball, and USA National Park. All things American. Those are good-natured pseudo-parodies of American rock, country, folk, and metal music. USA United States, for example, is them listing the names of American states. Akaten is avant garde art rock for the discerning consumer, on a budget. Chateau d'Akaten, 2001, is the best album to get into this side of Yoshida. Songs like Wine and Miso are fascinating, if one can stand gurgling and liquid noises. It is goofy fun, but can this actually be classified as music, or is it something more like performance art? It's a strange edge case in the line of Spike Jonze, Dr. Demento, Weird Al Yankovic, and Les Luthiers. You know what? Maybe the comparison to Spike Jonze is more correct than I first thought. Zubi Zuva, later Zubi Zuva X, is another technical outgrowth of Acid Mother's Temple, basically a barbershop vocal trio. Okay, maybe not basically. The original trio of Zubi Zuva was Tatsuya Yoshida as the alto voice, Yukifumi Shibasaki as the tenor, and Hideki Takahashi as the baritone. The later Zubi Zuva X was more a formation, called a limited special unit, of Acid Mother's Temple with Tatsuya Yoshida, Asushi Suyama, and Kawabata Makoto. Zubi Zuva is this is serious now, an a cappella Zeuhl trio. The trio sings unaccompanied in a false language with sometimes Japanese or English words interspersed. They rarely use more than 2 words in each hymn, similar to Gregorian chants, Buddhist mantras, or even doo-wop. The joke is the trio repeat Zubi Zuva, or an alien phrase / noise, as the only lyrics, until it becomes absurd, such as in the Zubi hymn. The 1996 album, Jericho's lyrics, are only variations of Zubi Zuva, or another phrase put to irregular rhythms. The album's name, Jericho, intended to invoke the false religious dimension most of the vocal performances have. Europe, for example, shifts between art-like vocal sequences to hooligan sports chants, then to screams and yodeling. Then Domo Domo is less music and more of a parody of the endless courtesy words used in Japanese conversation. Zubi Zuva is more postmodern vocal experimentation than music. Once again, the Spike Jonze comparison is apt. A cappella removed from anything like music and language, then fashioned into postmodern Dadaist poetry. Psyche Bugyo, short for Psychedelic Magistrate, should also be mentioned as another odd adjacent project. It is a psychedelic pseudo-folk rock project led by Atsushi Suyama, with Kawabata Makoto and sometimes Yoshida as players. The idea was to cross mid-1960s to 1970s British-style rock, from a Japanese perspective, with Japanese B-movies about ninjas, samurai, and aliens. Described as an ultimate ultra-personal rock fusion of East and West! Exclamation point. It also derives elements from Suyama's idea of fake traditional music. See his folk rock album, The Fake Star Judgeman and the Havens, 2015. It is adjacent in tone to Akaten, Psyche Bugyo that is. Psyche Bugyo, though, is a series of Japanese cultural and rock music in-jokes, rather than performances like Akaten. The lyrics are a menagerie of Japanese, English, and noise, with serious prog rock influence. Genroku Passion Play 2013, to overexplain the joke, is a fake concept album about the Akko Ronin, English the 47 Ronin, actually being space aliens. Part 3 of Genroku Passion Play has a part which is a psychedelic rock cover of 3 Irish jig/reels, such as including Morrison's jig, intermixed with purposefully hokey samurai film sound effects and cicada ambience. It is tongue-in-cheek and distinct from anything like Ruins, but a close project. Though Yoshida did not majorly contribute to any of Psyche Bugyo's studio albums, he is connected to both Makoto and Tsuyama, and thus often performs with them as a live member of Psyche Bugyo. Psyche Bugyo is like Steel Ice Band crossed with Hawkwind if both groups were Japanese King Crimson alumni. Tsuyama even had a Hawkwind cover band named Nankai Hawkwind. Good music, but those unfamiliar with samurai movies, British rock, and Irish folk music may miss the jokes that make it up. Despite the existence of Psyche Bugyo, Tairikuotoko vs. Sanmyakunonna may lay claim to the most insular Yoshida project that exists thanks to an in-joke. The group's name translates, vaguely, to Continental Man vs. Mountain Range Woman, and is a joke that probably makes sense to a select few even in Japanese. It will be called TVS from here on, because, frankly, to a native English speaker, it's a tongue twister. Much of the original TVS group, such as violinist Yuji Katsui, was assembled from Yoshida-adjacent Zeuhl and noise groups, such as Bondage Fruit and Ibo Ibo. The actual music is a parody and send-up to Japanese avant garde rock, mostly the Tokyo scene Yoshida emerged from. How? TVS takes members from other Japanese prog-rock/experimental bands and forces them to play instruments they're unfamiliar with. Yoshida, technically the leader of the informal group, plays the bass in the group. The joke being Yoshida is known for playing drums, so he plays bass instead, since he's not the one that plays bass in Ruins. That's the joke. Similarly, Tsuyama appears on vocals instead of any instrument, despite being a veritable virtuoso. The unfamiliar instrument gimmick is of course funnier in concept than it is in execution. Not because the music is bad, no, Yoshida's actually a fine bass player, but it only creates mediocre music. Though there is novelty and noticeable effort in songs like Birdsong from Viva Young Florida. The group seems aware of the issue and thus have only put out 2 albums as TVS, Perfect Hell 1994 and Viva Young Florida 1998. There's not too much to talk about here because the existence of the group is in itself a joke. Not that it's bad, it just exists to be a joke. Koenjihyakkei, Japanese name rendered multiple ways in English spelling, is usually translated as 100 sights or 100 views of Koenji. Koenjihyakkei is pinned as Yoshida's orthodox soul band, as orthodox as soul can be as a genre. The band is a magma tribute, though not a cover band. Yoshida, in the manner of Robert Fripp, is the only constant member of the band and thus the main engine. Similar to the previous TVS, the band is often formed from an alternating cast of Tokyo alternative and prog players depending on availability. Vocalist Aki Kubuto of Bondage Fruit and Ruins alumni bassist Ryuichi Masuda appeared on the first self-titled album, 100 Sights of Koenji, 1994. Like Symphonica, KH usually employs female vocals and choruses as Magma does. So, technically, Koenjihyakkei is more directly influenced by French groups like Magma and Zeuhl, rather than Ruins. Christian Vander often receives direct thanks in album credits. KH is more symphonic rather than sheer loudness and speed. The name is another pun as well, a combination of woodblock print artist Hokusai series, 100 Views of Mount Fuji, also author Osamu Dazai's short story Fugaku Hyakkei, and the Koenji apartments in Tokyo where the band was formed. It could then be called 100 Views of Koenji District, or 100 Views of Koenji Apartments, which, since the 1960s, have been a center for Japanese underground music. The pun and apt summary of the complex fusion of Japanese jazz rock, progressive music, Japanese music history, and urban triviality that the band's music often alludes to. It does not do this in Japanese or English though. As is the classical trait of soul music, Koenjihyakkei makes use of passionate pseudo-language gibberish lyrics for its vocals on the first album, 100 Sights of Koenji. The opening songs like Eos and Doi Doi are loud, banging magma tributes which border on worship music. This becomes even more direct with Zoltan, played on synthesized organ, which is openly a Kyrie eleison, performed as such in opposition to the rest of the album. Tobin Jacobs describes it as, Zoltan sounds like a funeral for a black magic practitioner. The song, Molavina, sounds like outright pop or speed pop, which because they are Japanese, often draws the comparison to video game and anime soundtracks when played by Koenjihyakkei. That is hard to substantiate with KH though, because it takes in and uses everything from across Yoshida's entire career. Beside pure pop music, Ozone Falls has keyboard work that sounds outright apocalyptic, with clear reference to ruins. Gepik too shares this trait. Some listeners claim Yagona resembles styles of Eastern European folk music, mainly Romanian. The average listener will undoubtedly find it folksy, if not shanty-like, and it suggests a deep influence of both Ibo Ibo and Suyama on Yoshida's composition here. This is also true of Ave Dunma, which is an interesting halfway point between electronic pop, pirate music, and faster jazz rock songs. The 100 Sights is a more than accurate title, as each song seems to be its own view of a distinct world and soundscape. Of course, Yoshida acknowledges a deep debt to Magma, so perhaps it generates an interesting exchange between the French world and Japanese world of Zeuhl music. KH falls more into line with Sax Ruins as an experimentation in musical vocabulary rather than developing upon one main theme. Here are a few comments to summarize KH's second album, which was remixed as Viva Koenji, originally released in 1997, then re-released in 2006. Fogdod, I'm only 20 minutes into this album so far, and I think my musical vocabulary has suddenly swelled to 5 times its normal size. Tzmborgha, clearly a fan, Guath Da is one of the most psychotic pieces of music I've ever heard. Morphic Resonator, someone described this as a Klingon opera, probably the best description I've heard. This best describes Brago off the album. Keck3746, unsafe to consume in large portions. Also consult a doctor before consuming an irregular amount of Koenjihyakkei. Though it will not be covered here, Onger Shishpa 2005 is another highly respected album by Koenjihyakkei, which employs an added dimension of Japanese traditional sound, courtesy of flutist Keiko Komori. Later KH albums, such as Onger Shishpa 2005 and Dormfischka 2018, shift to a much mellower direction. That is an incredibly brief summary, variable and complex, another product of Tatsuya Yoshida's endless dimension of sound. Speaking of puns and dimensions, Korekyojin is another major Yoshida project, a progressive jazz rock trio formed in 1998 by drummer Yoshida, guitarist Natsuki Kido, Bonded Fruit, and bassist Mitsuru Nasuno, Altered States/Ground Zero. It has some crossover with another Yoshida Nasuno ImProg, improvised progressive, project, Daimonji. Korekyojin, though, has an expressive influence from 1970s and 1980s British prog rock. The band's name, like Koenjihyakkei, is often rendered and stylized in different ways, though roughly translates to this, or maybe that, giant. It is actually a Japanese corruption of the group's 2 main progressive rock influences, This Heat and Gentle Giant. Kore, this, and Kyojin, giant. Korekyojin, though, is more a descendant of Gentle Giant's style, as both Yoshida and Nasuno enjoy exploring odd polyrhythms. Korekyojin then sounds orthodox, as it is more about playing with scales rather than with sound itself, like Ruins. If Ruins is monolithic, then Korekyojin is gigantic in the sense each beat fills up the auditory space of an entire room. The album Arabesque 2004 has a strong persuasion towards this gigantic, rock-based, and geometric construction in Korekyojin's philosophy. Arabesque is an appropriate name for the flowing, but ultimately geometric curves and points essentially devoid of anthropomorphism. There's no vocals on the album, so all the window dressing is cleared away in favor of an absolute focus on the instruments. Instruments in Korekyojin's vocabulary are very specifically treated as tools, so each part of the trio is distinct in the greater flow of the music. This is especially true for the self-titled album, Korekyojin 1996, but Arabesque 2004 will take the focus as it has a more pronounced identity. The song Arabesque is taken from the debut album, then developed upon as a basic work in Arabesque, the album. Even if the 2 versions are barely related tracks, they display the development and focus of the band. Arabesque 2004 is ultimately a very stark music. Betwixt is playful and pop-like while indulging in the echoes of space music, but still isolated in sound. That causes it to border on modern post-rock, which can also be detected in doldrums, progressive cycles of exploring and reaching out from a bass mark, which Korekyojin continues to explore in other songs like Poet and Peasant. Most of the impressive technicals are going on beneath the surface to manipulate sound to such a degree. Genre scampers about on Arabesque as the shapes of songs shift in the overall pattern of the album, like sands in a desert. Rambling and Presage have undercurrents of folk rock and even tones of salsa, maybe, that show the sounds are not constrained to purely products of the 1970s and 1980s. The trio does enjoy that period though, so certain motifs return again and again, but often in foreign visages such as through Middle Eastern string tones, or ersatz string sounds. Clean and natural sounds, but not studio-sterilized sounds. There are smaller experimental sections like Sluice, which will remind one of Heider Mesta Groningim. All the songs, long or short, maintain a workman quality that allows each independent segment to be appreciated. This is no mesh or wall of sound. It is clear these are Yoshida compositions trimmed of any hardcore tendencies they may have expressed if performed by Ruins. These are songs for a musician to show off to other musicians. Isotope 2005-2, while largely a live album, is a strong follow-up to Arabesque. It is only be mentioned here because the cycle of Poet and Peasant, Jackson, and Isotope, recorded at Starpine's Cafe in Tokyo, on album are a vivid representation of Korekyojin's power. Poet and Peasant, perhaps a reference to Franz von Suppe's composition, is superb with shimmering guitar sequences by Kiddo one might compare to modern 2020s indie rock. But the tense middle section, based on bass and drums, which then segues into a prog-rock distortion ending. It is an overall dry sound one might feel disease at, but there is a triumphant optimism here rather than a challenging alien soundscape. Jackson continues that optimism with groovy strings and drum that may be drawn from 1960s, 1970s California style, or even group sounds. There's a warm, tropical dimension to it rather than the standoffish, though technically impressive, chill of Poet and Peasant. The last few sections of Jackson swap between waltz-like and folk dance-like timing before returning to the warm, tropical rhythm for a final breakdown. Isotope is exactly what the title suggests. Fast and sparking, it is speedy enough to melt DNA. This is Yoshida, Nasuno, and Kiddo playing at Ruins-like speed, but without the barking. It unfortunately lacks the flavor of Poet and Peasant and Jackson, but guitar, bass, and drums all sting like saw blades on this one. Only the 3-minute mark sees any break in the song, which is strung through with low-frequency sounds like a sonic abyss as the end draws near, the universe of sound slowly expanding until the energy within it rips it apart. Doubt does not exist for Korekyojin, because all 3 members of it are beyond fear. What else can be said about Tatsuya Yoshida? No, seriously, I'm running out of things to say here. The man has 61 releases and 826 credits listed on Discogs alone. And, as said at the start, this probably isn't even complete. There's projects that even break the limits of what can be called music, such as Ruinzhatova, or Ruinzhatova, or Ruins-Hatoba, though written by Yoshida as Ruinzhatova in English and in kanji in Japanese. It is an experimental music collective of Yoshida, longtime collaborator Atsushi Suyama, and Yamamoto Seichi of the Osaka Avant Garde group Omoide Hatoba, a former member of drumming band Boredoms. The underground pseudo-supergroup name, usually written in Japanese and kanji, is a collection of both Ruins and Hatoba. The group alternates between covering rock, art rock, and electronic standards in an explosive traditional experimental style. See Close the RH Kiki 2003, while also producing their own experimental material. See Ruinzhatova 1994. Occasionally, the border between these two blur, as Ruinzhatova likes to make the listener question what original music even is. It is essentially a much more meta version of Ruins with a more prominent punk and DIY influence. The original tracks titled things like Gom Devil, CD Killers, Dada Panda, Midnight Highway, and Aliens Gagao, Olympic with Peter Gabriel, and United States of Stinkbug. That's a good one. Musically, these tracks can involve, well, anything. They're usually shorter experiments. It can sound like a rock band, then turn into a cappella dog-like chanting, a sound effect cover of a prog-rock song, then everyone can burst into their own rhythm while blabbering metal-style Japanese puns. Wa off close the RH Kiki is how many different ways the Japanese syllable wa can be pronounced/rendered in both vocals, sound effects, and on instruments. The group's main, monstrous track is the 24-minute improvisational Rock +1, open parentheses, Challenge Your Face, close parentheses. The title is self-explanatory. It is intended to be one of the most challenging songs ever to sit through in one listening. The actual received difficulty may vary from listener to listener, though. That's just a disclaimer. The album, close the RH Kiki. Kiki here means joy or glee, and yes, that is the actual title of the album with the repeated the, includes an interesting menagerie of covers. Hyperactivity is the word used by one reviewer to describe this album. It opens with a cover of Trans-Europe Express as a straight tribute to Kraftwerk that slowly transforms into a hard rock cover interlaced with too many sound effects to name. Glitch tones, trash cans, drum machines, hinge squeaking, the whistle of bombs falling, train horns, etc. This is one of the easier tracks to explain too. It involves Yoshida, so that is to be expected. The next song is James Brown's Sex Machine and King Crimson's Lark's Tongue and Aspic Part 2 at the same time. Sex Machine on the right side and Lark's Tongue and Aspic Part 2 on the left. Yes, Ruinzhatova did this meme back in 2003. Track 6 is, I think, a Japanese flute drum bass cover pseudo-parody of the themes from the 1970s anime Ashitanojo, Sazai-san, and the popular Japanese song Ame ga Goe, Walk Over Amage Pass. That, of course, is then complemented by an acid groove cover of Yes's prog-rock epic Close to the Edge in 1972, which, as some may know, was itself inspired by Finnish composer Jan Sibelius. This Ruinzhatova cover is claimed to be a note-to-note recreation, though not an instrument-to-instrument recreation. The album itself is a cover too. What other prog-rock band made famous cows of pasture? As can be seen, Ruinzhatova is very intertextual, maybe even incestual with how much it bends back in on itself. Then there's, all one word here, Live in Summer 2006, an album which has 6 lengthy songs titled Everywhere, Somewhere, Elsewhere, Nowhere, Where, Here. This rendition of Ruinzhatova is more straightforward rock band style, but is labeled as ImProg progressive free rock. It is a meltdown of everything touched in Ruinzhatova into a new form. This is where it is at. If Ruins is too normal, too consumer, Ruinzhatova is there to accommodate all desires, anywhere. One reviewer has argued Ruins' punk Zeuhl style has evolved into what can only be called Complexicore. Arguments abound about if Ruins is the ancestor of Japanese math rock. Yoshida is a strange uncle after all. Complexicore, though, is not a useful term in this discussion, but it is indicative of Yoshida as Ruins. Prog-Rock and Zeuhl, which evolves under the auspices of the Avant Garde, with punk energy, to incarnate through Tatsuya Yoshida's drumming, or whatever instrument he's playing at the moment. He is the devil from the east who beats his drum towards infinity. If there exists a sound, Yoshida, and whoever is accompanying him at the time, has used it. How would one describe the monolithic existence of Ruins? A Japanese magma led by Philip Glass? Yeah, that sounds good. Do you have the stones to listen? Ruination is best experienced while it's live. Zeuhl Kazuyoshi. No, that's not right. It's not right. A special thank you to my supporters, Violanon, and an anonymous patron.